I would like to tell you a story about how the encounter with a lamppost changed my life. So one night I came home from work and I was looking out my front room window, and there was a couple of boys standing outside a lamppost, and they were climbing up the lamppost onto a factory roof adjacent to where I lived. And they were stealing lead, so they were raising the tiles from off the roof and then pulling out the lead. And so I did the right thing. As a good citizen, I thought, I've got to challenge that behaviour. So I went outside and I said to the boys on the roof, "Oi, what are you doing?" To which in turn they very politely, not, responded and told me to go away. As this is a TED Talk, I'm not going to use the language and the profanities that they decided to use. So I then continued to decide to challenge these guys. So I grew up in a very traditional Italian household, and so I pulled the one-liner that I thought, this is going to destroy this kid, particularly on the roof. And the line was this: "What would your dad say to you right now if he saw you on that roof?" The boy on the roof turned around to me and he said, "My dad's going to say nothing for at least 10 years because he's in jail for armed robbery." At that point, I had nowhere to go. And so I was inspired to do something positive and to try and make a difference. And so I set up a youth club, and that youth club evolved, grew, and developed. The reason I did that was because actually as a child, I could have been one of those boys who went off the rails. You see, when I went through education, I also got into a lot of trouble. Some of you are looking there and thinking, how on earth could I ever get into trouble? Trust me, I got into loads of trouble. It turns out I was severely dyslexic, but I wasn't diagnosed until much, much later on in life. And so I would get into loads of bother, loads of trouble, lots of hassle as a kid. And so I realized that actually I could have gone down a wrong route. However, I had these significant protective factors in my life. Let me talk to you about Mr. Ray. Mr. Ray was my art teacher, and Mr. Russell was my woodwork teacher. So whenever I got kicked out of class, which was often, to be honest with you, I didn't actually spend much time in normal class because I would kick off. I would go to either the art room or the woodwork room. And I also had my mum and dad who were very supportive. So I left school and I got an apprenticeship as a carpenter, and therefore that really inspired me to do something for these young people. And that opened my world into the world of criminal justice. And so that's my world that I operate in now. So I want to talk to you a little about the criminal justice system. Did you know that last year, the UK and Wales spent 5.4 billion on prisons alone? There are approximately 80,000 people in the prison system at any one time. So when you do the maths on that, it works out about 70k a person. That's a lot of money on a lot of people. Now that figure doesn't actually take into account multiple factors. It doesn't take into account multiple factors like all of the services around that, all of the social care, all of the accident and emergency, all of the court costs. So there are significant issues, and it's widely acknowledged and recognised that actually our current prison system, in fact, prison systems all over the world, don't actually work. Here's another interesting statistic, and it depends, as you guys will know, statistics can have various different meanings. So most people who go to prison will potentially reoffend within, 50% of people who go to prison will generally reoffend within a year. So the issue is, why does it go wrong? When I was about 10 years ago, I got admitted to hospital, and I was really poorly, so they did a load of blood tests, and they discovered actually that I seemed to have a real deficiency of iron in my blood. So the natural conclusion was, we're going to infuse Mr. Russo with a load of iron to bring him back up to normal. As a consequence, a doctor walked past my bed, and she'd actually trained in Italy and said, "Have you got thalassemia by any chance?" And I said, "I didn't even know what thalassemia was." Thalassemia is a blood condition which actually highlights that you seem to have low iron count in your blood. As a consequence, she stopped the test, and they retested me, discovered I was thalassemic. The long and short of that was that if I'd have had an infusion of iron in my body, it could have potentially killed me, and it certainly would have caused me long-term damage. They had the best of intentions, but they got the diagnosis wrong. what I want to suggest is when we're looking at the criminal justice system, sometimes we have the best of intentions, but we've got the diagnosis wrong. There's a lot of data, there's a lot of evidence, there's a lot of information out there about that when folks are within the criminal justice system, it's often because of trauma and past traumas. And there's a lot of issues around trauma. And there's people significantly more qualified than me to talk about that trauma. But in my experience, I've never met a gang member, I've never met somebody who's gone to prison who didn't have significant traumas growing up. And the word trauma, by the way, simply means wound. That's what it means. But there are emotional wounds, and there are emotional wounds of what's happened to you, or even in many cases, what's not happened to you. So it can be a physical wound of literally you've had a trauma of abuse, but it can be a wound where you've not received the love, attention, and care that you've needed as a child. And my experience says that's what a lot of folks have. So we've got to re-evaluate the actual reason why we're putting people in jail and what the diagnosis is. As my journey continued beyond the lamppost, in the community that I worked, we had two gangs at war with each other in my local community. And there were a series of firearms incidents, shootings, and all sorts of stuff. And therefore, the local authorities and the powers that be called a big community meeting, of which I was invited. And at that meeting, they highlighted two boys who were the main protagonists, causing havoc, literally terrorizing those communities. So the first boy, and I've changed their names for today, we'll call Keith. And the second boy we'll call Anthony. And they were terrorizing. Now, Keith and Anthony were in their early 20s, but interestingly, they used to come to my youth club when they were younger, when they were much younger. So I took it upon myself, in collaboration with lots of partners, to engage, to try and reach out, to try and appeal to these guys before somebody got murdered. And Keith engaged. Sadly, Anthony didn't. Keith engaged, he got involved, and he's now married, he's got a job, he holds his job down. Whereas Anthony, on the other hand, ended up pursuing that life of crime, ended up pursuing the violence and all the rest of it, and ended up getting a very long, significant sentence in prison. As part of that journey, there was one occasion where I had to attend what is called a bail back in a custody suite. If you've ever been in a custody suite, they're quite intimidating. And a custody suite is basically made up of where you've got the police and you've got to answer and give an account for what or why you're there. And so within this custody suite, I'm there with Keith, and in the corner of my eye, I see a young boy. He looked about 8 years old. He had to be older than that to be in the custody suite. But he'd been used to burgle houses by his uncle, actually, and they were pushing him through windows. Several months later, I was doing another visit in another prison, and I see this boy. And he came and spoke to me because I spoke to him in the custody suite. I was quite concerned about him in the custody suite. And he came and spoke to me. And then he ran to his dad. And I saw at that moment, we've got a cycle. We've got a cycle here that we've got to break. Because his dad was in prison. That's who he was visiting. And we've got to break that cycle. We've got to do something different. So as a consequence, I had the beginning part of this year, I visited the most amazing program on the planet. It's actually in Los Angeles. And it's a program called Homeboy Industries. And they have a completely different philosophy to what they're doing, to what we're doing. They're not about punishing, but they're about healing. They're about loving. There's the most wonderful human being, a guy called Father Greg Boyle, who is an absolute superstar. You know when they tell you, don't meet your superstars and your heroes? Well, actually, he went above and beyond all of my expectations. He's a wonderful human being. But their philosophy at Homeboy is about kinship. It's about love. It's about compassion. It's about kindness. It's about connecting with people with where they're at. And you know what? They've seen a real difference. And the difference isn't one that they measure on a matrix. It's one that they measure in the lives of human beings and individuals and families and how that moves on. So Homeboys is a phenomenal program which has a massive, massive impact in its local community. So we've got to find different ways, because what Homeboys do is a very small, it's almost like an oasis in the middle of a sea of despair. And their philosophy of what they do, providing opportunities, providing jobs, providing healing. When you walk through the door at Homeboys, you're greeted by a group of individuals. One of those individuals is a therapist to help go through some of your own childhood trauma, to get healing through that trauma. And you know what? It works. Father Greg has this wonderful saying. He has a beautiful quote, and he says this. He says, if it's true that those who are traumatized will continue to emit trauma and damage those around them, because that's what happens, guys, then it's also got to be true that those who are loved and cherished will first and foremost learn to love themselves, and secondly, they will learn to love those who are around them. It works, guys. We've got to change the narrative. We've got to stop trying to punish people into well-being, because it doesn't work. Love is the key to this. Love is the answer to this. So let me go back to the two gangs at war with each other. Let me talk to you. I mentioned to you about Keith. He's doing really well. I only see Keith probably maybe twice a year, and that's good news. And I normally see him in the shop, or if there's a very specific football game on, or if you're American, a soccer game. By the way, you've got it wrong. If there's a very significant, he'll always call me and we'll have a little bit of banter. But let me talk to you about Anthony. Anthony went on to serve a significant sentence. But after about 6 years into that sentence, he reached out to me, he wrote to me. And I started to visit him and went to visit him. And I went to visit him because, do you know why? Because he needed people to visit him, he needed people to connect with him. And many, many, many years later, let me talk to you about Anthony. Anthony now holds down a job. Anthony actually is having an amazing, significant impact on his society and his community beyond ways that you could imagine. Anthony is one of my best friends. Anthony is an inspiration. And whilst I was preparing this talk, we were sat down together talking. Obviously, he's not in prison anymore. And he said to me this. He says, you know what, Joe? He says, you cannot put a time frame on when somebody decides they're going to turn their life around. You cannot put a time frame on love. You cannot put a time frame on kindness, compassion, and kinship. And that's where his words. And he said, he said categorically, because of the things that had happened in his life, that he could say those moments of love, if you like, those infusions of love, those little bits here, little bits there, led him to make those decisions. Now, don't get me wrong, that doesn't make it easy for him. That doesn't make this journey easy. But in fact, actually, he's still started on this journey. So he is an inspiration. And one day I hope he's standing on a stage just like this doing his own TED Talk. But I want to leave you with this, because we're almost about to be finished. I want you to imagine a time where you personally, as an individual, screwed up, messed up, got a parking fine, got a speeding fine, bumped the car, fell out with your family, had an argument. Think about that moment. Think about that time. Maybe you failed an exam, but you screwed up, you messed up, you failed. How did you feel at that moment? What were your emotions? What did you call yourself? What did you say? I bet some of you said things to yourself that you would never allow anybody else to say. And you certainly wouldn't say that to anybody else. Think about that. How did you feel when you messed up? Now, imagine another thing. Imagine that there is somebody there. Imagine that there is somebody, a Mr. Russell, a Mr. Ray, who is there, and he or she doesn't care what you've done. They're not interested. They're not bothered that you have messed up, because they're interested in you and they still love you and they still care about you. Imagine that person. Imagine how that makes you feel. Now, imagine that person being you. Imagine how you feel about not being bothered, about you failing, you messing up. Imagine that for a moment, how you would feel. And the last thing I want you to imagine, I'm going to finish with a quote. The last thing I want you to imagine you being that person for somebody else. Imagine that you could be the person who loves, cherishes, and cares for that individual who's messed up, who's failed, who's screwed up in ways that actually are not concerned to you. Imagine you are that person and that you are there to love them, not to get an outcome, not to get a win, but just to be there to love them. Imagine that. I guess that many of us, whether you're watching this or in the room, can probably look to someone in your own life and think, that was my Mr. Ray. That was my Mr. Russell. By the way, I've got loads of them. I've got Father Greg. I've got Steve. I've got loads of individuals in my life who I can look to. And what I want to challenge you to do is go away and thank them. Give them a hug. I'm an Italian. I hug all the time. I'm a big hugger. Give them a hug. And actually accept and acknowledge what they've done. But equally, what I want you to think about and leave you with this thought before my quote. One of the hardest things I've had to deal with, and one of the most heart-wrenching things, is in this journey that I've been on within working with the most deprived communities and gang members and so on, the hardest thing is this: finding people who have no one. And there are lots of them. There is no one. There is no one. And that's a problem, because you know what Mother Teresa famously said? The thing with society is we forgot that we belong to each other, and we belong to each other. And I'm going to end on this because time is almost over. I have a very quick quote to you. We are all born with the urge to be connected with others, to feel loved, wanted, welcomed, and owned by others. We're born with that, guys. Every single one of us. So go away and be that person. Thank you very much.